The science is clear and has been communicated for the past 30 years, and still we're not moving in the right direction. I don't get depressed. I get angry. What are the systems that determine the state of the planet? This is about us. It is about our future.
All is not well with our planet.
As we increase our pressures on Earth, we are now crossing irreversible tipping points.
Nature is being degraded at a rate and a scale that is unprecedented.
When we emit CO2, about a third has ended up in the ocean.
There's no sign of any wildlife at all.
Based on the 7.5 million deaths, we have already crossed the boundary as far as aerosols are concerned.
As we manipulate the planet's climate, we're literally playing with fire.
Are we concerned about fighting the climate crisis?
The window is still open for us to have a future for humanity. We still have a chance. What we do between 2020 and 2030, it will be the decisive decade for humanity's future on Earth.
Human health, animal health, and environmental health, the three are so much linked.
We've covered the whole planet with knowledge. The future is not determined. The future is in our hands.
It's a remarkable time to be alive.
You may never look at the world in the same way again.
So my first question to you, Professor, is regarding animal agriculture. And considering we now know that animal agriculture is the leading driver for climate breakdown, ocean dead zone, species extinction, habitat loss, why do you think so many environmentalists are actually shying away from criticizing animal agriculture directly?
No, so first of all, just to confirm that, yes, the broken food system in the world is truly broken. This is the single largest cause behind, moving across planetary boundaries into a risk and high danger zone. The single largest emitter of greenhouse gases, the single largest cause behind loss of biodiversity, the world's largest consumer of fresh water, 70% of the withdrawals of fresh water are consumed by food, and then also the major reason why we're expanding land into natural ecosystems and the way we overuse nitrogen and phosphorus. So fix the food system, and we largely, move ourselves decisively back into a safe space on a stable planet. So that is a really important fact. Then, when it comes to what are the solutions there, and what role does plant-based versus livestock or animal-based protein play, we have a lot of evidence that ruminants, red meat is one of the major sources behind methane and carbon emissions from the agricultural sector. At the same time, we have quite a lot of scientific evidence that animal protein in balanced amounts can be part of a healthy diet, particularly when you look across the entire world. And if you come to vulnerable agricultural or pastoralist communities around the world, it's quite obvious that we need to safeguard a certain level of animal protein in those diets. So when we did the first ever scientific assessment of what is a good planetary health diet, a diet that both can serve healthy humans but also serve healthy planet, that turns into a flexitarian diet, not a fully plant-based diet, but a diet that is ramping up plant-based protein in a very significant way. So basically going from scaling down in the rich parts of the world, like in Europe and in the US, red meat consumption reductions from 700-800 grams per person per week to 150 grams per person per week. So a very drastic decline, but still one serving a week of red meat, two servings a week of white meat, chicken, and 2 servings a week of fish. So 5 servings of protein. which is assessed basically only on the state of let's say the mainstream assessment within the medical research. And the question is, can this be produced in a sustainable way? So, it's clear that plant-based energy sources and protein sources are fundamentally important for us to be able to have a world that develops within planetary boundaries. But it's not the only solution, and it's not obvious that it can be applied everywhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that leads me on to the next question. But before I do want to sort of press you on the final part of that question was, why do you personally, as a scientist, feel like a lot of environmentalists seem afraid to criticize animal agriculture? Do you feel that there is just a lack of understanding of the implications of the damage animal agriculture is doing, factory farming? Or do you think there is something bigger at play?
I think it's, to start with, I should say that I'm not entirely sure if you say that the scientific community is not willing to criticize the industrial modern scale meat industry, because I think there is a lot of critique out there. If there's not enough critique, I think it has to do with not fully understanding how the system works. I mean, my conclusion is, for example, that grain-fed meat production is an unsustainable system that should be phased out. While you can see small-scale grazing-fed or grazing-based ruminant systems that have multiple ecosystem functions in keeping landscapes open in different ecosystems around the world, and are providers of dairy products that still play a very important role in both cultures and for health. And without livestock, you have no dairy products, and therefore also, rather than slaughtering the calves that can give you the milk, you can have a sustainable offering of certain amounts of animal protein. So I think it's also about the understanding the full complexity of how livestock systems really work. And but you're right that there is this perhaps a tendency of allowing all of these systems to basically be placed in one section.
Right.
I mean, the big drama in Europe, for example, is that we import soya feed to intensive red meat production systems in Europe, and that soya feed is contributing to ruining the Amazon rainforest. And then we have a linear production system where we have overproduction of manure, unhealthy people, and we eutrofy waterways downstream. So we have this linear system that cuts down trees, exports nutrients from Brazil, comes to Europe, and downstream through excreta and urine causes eutrophication of downstream waterways. That is, of course, a completely broken system.
Absolutely. Are you familiar with the study by Joseph Poore of Oxford University, which suggests that only 18% of our calories are coming from livestock, but actually it takes up over 83% of our farmland? And he often states, and he talks quite publicly about the fact that, switching to a plant-based diet has far more reaching consequences. And I guess to sort of not to labor on the point, but because cutting animal products out of our diet can have such a huge impact on our carbon footprint as individuals, should we be pushing more? Because I know you mentioned obviously flexitarian, which is massively reducing our meat consumption. Of course, you highlighted that there are many communities around the world where that just isn't possible due to the land, the type of land. But over here in the Western world and sort of the US and the UK and across Europe, where we do have the option to opt for more climate friendly foods, should we be pushing people more to do this? Should we all really just be giving up meat in the Western world?
Well, I think a really important point that you make is that there's not one solution for everyone in the world, and that many livestock systems in the world have adapted through centuries, often millennia, and therefore are well adapted to their local conditions. So when you have, for example, grazing land for livestock, it's often the land that you cannot use for cultivating other types of foodstuff. So it's not so that you can simply just substitute extensive grazing in the Tanzanian savanna to maize crops because the soils are simply not deep enough. There's no substitution simply. So it's not as simple just to say that you eradicate all livestock and then you have a solution. But you're right. I'm absolutely with you that we have over the last 50 years allowed ourselves to simply go out of the corridor of both sustainability on the planet and health for people when it comes to production and consumption of red meat products, which we need to now turn back, and we need to particularly turn back first and foremost, turn back in the rich parts of the world and do it really fast, because we know that unfortunately, with the rapidly emerging economies in, for example, in China and India and Southeast Asia, we see, unfortunately, a linear relationship with per capita income and consumption of meat. So the meat consumption increases because they're aspiring to the lifestyles represented by the richer northern economy. So the shift has to also come as a way of being ambassadors for a new lifestyle.
Absolutely. Other than obviously removing animal products from our diet, which can have far-reaching planetary health consequences, what are some of the other things that we as individuals can do to sort of reduce our carbon footprint, reduce our environmental impact?
Well, there are many things we can do and must do. And as I mentioned earlier, the two big transitions we face, I mean, there are many, but the two prime ones is the energy transition and the food transition. So to reach a zero carbon energy system in just 30 years' time, 2050, and to have sustainable, healthy food in the same time. Basically, I mean, all the climate scenario shows, for example, that global agriculture must shift from being a source of greenhouse gases to become a sink of greenhouse gases within one generation. So this is an agricultural revolution, basically. So what are then, additional to what we eat, the pathways towards coming back to a safe operating space on planetary boundaries? Well, number one that we individuals must do is to contribute to moving towards zero fossil fuel use in our lifestyles. How can we do that? Well, the number one issue that I think we all simply need to really take responsibility for is to download a carbon calculator on our mobile phones, calculate our own individual carbon emitting carbon footprint, and then decide, as individuals or families or communities, that we will follow the scientific path, which is the same path that political leaders now are forced to accept and are accepting, namely the carbon law. And the carbon law says cut emissions by half every decade, and we have a chance of a soft landing. And anyone can do that. Anyone can say, okay, over the next 10 years, I'm going to cut emissions by half. How do you do that? Well, you do it first. The easiest step is, apart from what we eat, is to shift mobility, meaning shifting from using private cars to public transport, from private cars to cycling, private cars to different types of combustion, of course, to go from diesel to electric mobility, but also to recognize that reducing on private air travel. Again, I'm even here not among those who say we need to go to zero overnight, but we can, for example, take decisions to say, I'm from now on not going to fly distances that are shorter than 600 kilometers, because we have generally always alternative land transport systems for such distances. So domestic flights can be canceled. And of course, that would take down your footprint potentially very rapidly. Depending on your life situation. But these are things that all of us can and must start really working with.
Absolutely. One of the other alternatives with regard to animal protein is cellular agriculture. I'm not sure what your awareness is or understanding of cellular agriculture, but it uses a fraction of the environmental footprint. And if and when it can be produced to scale, it could potentially be an alternative to animal proteins across the world, not obviously just for the humans that decide they wish to continue or have to continue to consume animal products, but also to companion animals, pets, and animals in sanctuaries. What are your thoughts on this sort of innovation? Do you see it as a sort of powerful solution?
Well, I think all the cards need to be on the table, and I think cellular foods and different forms of microbial protein and all forms of kind of alternative protein sources are worth investing in, exploring, and they will certainly, as they do already today, play an important role. But will they be the big solution? I'm doubtful. I'm doubtful because it is something that certainly will be an important niche for relatively individuals with high purchasing power in urban areas, and not so obviously the solution for large tracts of rural communities around the world. But I think again we have learned a lot in terms of not being naive to think that there is a kind of a silver bullet out there for these kind of challenges, that we need multiple solutions, and this is one of them. We need a high diversity of solutions, and that different forms of alternative foods, lab foods, are certainly one of the wedges that should be, and I think it will be, just like it does already today, playing an important role for more you know purchasing strong consumers or citizens in urban areas in the world, just as we see already today in larger urban areas, that where plant-based foods and different forms of alternative foods are rising in demand.
Absolutely. I mean, our philosophy, or my personal philosophy, is if you have the privilege and the opportunity to choose foods that have a low environmental impact, and you have the knowledge, it is a moral obligation, or an environmental obligation at least, to make those changes. Because obviously, if the options are there, then we should really consider strongly choosing them. My next question is, the Netflix hit Seaspiracy has had a huge effect on changing people's attitudes towards the sea, seafood, and the way humans are impacting our ocean. Is it your hope that Breaking Boundaries is going to have a similar effect to sort of widespread public awareness about the big picture of humanity on the planet?
The purpose of Breaking Boundaries is really to put all the science we have on the table on the risks we're posing to the planet as a whole, and to embed that in a story that hopefully engages people. So yes, I mean the hope is that this raises a higher level of engagement and willingness to be part of the transformation. But I also hope that as opposed to the oceans film, that this documentary also provides the scientific story that we are basically turning a corner, and we're turning a very exciting corner, because not only are we still having barely, but we still have the chance of deviating from the largest unmanageable risks, but we also see that sustainability and a zero carbon future can be a healthier, more secure, more prosperous, and more equitable future for all citizens in the world. So it's also a narrative to try and kind of reposition sustainability, reposition the whole environmental agenda from being an environmental issue to becoming the central story for modernity, for the next step in human modern civilizational development in the world. I mean, to kind of make sustainability the entry point for everything we do, basically reconnecting the world to planet Earth. And of course that's a big ask, but so we're not after just kind of trying to communicate that everything we're doing is wrong. we're rather saying, look here, there is so much evidence now that we have the recipe for success and a positive way forward.
We have all the tools we need, absolutely. And I obviously have seen the documentary, absolutely loved it. Like you, it made me feel depressed in parts, but it also made me feel angry, like you said. And I love that quote you said, I don't get depressed, I get angry. And I think it goes without saying that if we channel that anger into our work, into our advocacy, into our environmentalism, it's bound to bear some fruits. But so my next question is, Greta Thunberg is very frank about the damage animal agriculture is having to our oceans, to our rivers, deforestation, all these other things. David Attenborough, on the other hand, on the other hand, is a little more conservative. What are your thoughts on the sort of differences in the way people speak about these issues, and how radical really do we need to be when it comes to raising the alarm? Because that's what this film does. It really does raise the alarm. When I finished watching the film, I felt, emotionally charged about the future of humanity and deeply concerned.
Yes, it's a really good question, and and it's about the different roles we play, and I mean, Greta Thunberg, as the activist she is and should be, she has a possibility, and I think she feels she has the responsibility also to have the highest drumbeat. While a person like David Attenborough is of course somewhere in between, because he has a role of sharing the mainstream pathway of, there's always a normal distribution in all sciences, in all knowledge, and an academic like myself, I'm also sitting somewhere in this range from denialism to doomsday conclusions. And therefore, I think the world is best served by scientists like ourselves to be quite careful with the state of science, because if a person like myself step out too far away from let's say the published peer-reviewed research, the core that is out there, I mean, not single papers, but really the large bulk of the knowledge base, then I think it can, on the long term, I mean, it can on the short term have really positive impacts if you kind of make devastating warnings, but on the long term, you risk eroding the trust in science. And I think that's a very delicate balancing act, and society has entrusted huge levels of trust in science and the whole scientific method, and we need to be careful with it. So it's no one is doing wrong really, or right or wrong, but I just flag that we play different roles, and so it's not so surprising that I may be a little bit more careful in the way I articulate my assessment of animal-based agriculture compared to Greta, even though I have very often interactions with her, and I have a huge respect for what she and the Fridays for Future youth movement is accomplishing and is doing and is communicating.